Welcome, Kyle. I was just about to ask Tianon where the heck everybody is today. We're coming up on a few minutes after here. I've got a couple sitting out there looking for reviews, and I think the governance and the TOB stuff, I would say anybody can review those. We're not limited to any one particular spec maintainer on those things. So we're looking at like the website. The TOB one, it would be good if some of the other TOB members actually chimed in on, but we will see. Just verifying a election result, so that may be something as easy as Jory just saying yes, check, send it. Paste the notes over to the chat just in case anybody doesn't have those. Jory's here. Hey, Jory.
Hello.
Your ears are probably burning with me saying that I've got a few of them sitting over there in the TOB review queue where I think if you just say they look good, we'll just ship them with whatever is sitting there.
So right now,
What's that?
I was recalling that I have some messages from you and Tianan in Slack that I will go look at right now.
We're noisy like that.
Y'all are
But
like
it's
dogs that are noisy.
It's mostly as finalizing the TOB election and just saying, here's the updated website, here's the updated TOB README page, things like that. So this is where everybody is. Is everybody like figured out that we start 5 minutes after and so you're waiting until 6 minutes after to show up? Is that what's going on?
Yes.
Figured as much. Well, then you all missed that I was mentioning we got a handful of things in the review queue that are ready for people to look at. So if folks have a chance to look over there, that would be good. The one that we need maintainers on, let's see, we need the other Mike Brown for that one. And I don't think we have any other maintainers over there from distribution spec, but there is one sitting in there for distribution spec to update the referrers tag schema. Saji, I think you were chatting on this one last week, so if there's anything over there you think we're missing, feel free to chime in, but no, you're not a maintainer over there yet. We'll rope you in at some point when you're not looking. But those are all the things looking for reviews. Let's see. Header identifier for OCI scanners. Got another one to add on here. So let's chat about what's on the rest of the agenda items here today. So I just wanted to mention real quick, OpenTofu is talking about adding OCI artifact support. And so I linked over to their proposal, what they're looking at working on. They got some things in there talking about the OCI specs. They got some things in there talking about the ORS implementations. Overall, look through it. It looked good to me, but I figure I'll just kind of raise a little bit of awareness in case anybody wanted to give it a little extra set of eyes to make sure everything looks good. But otherwise, I'm just happy to see people starting to use this. And all kinds of people show up. So I'm going to rush through this because I get a feeling a bunch of people want to talk about something else here later on in the discussion. Blake 3, that is in here. So Rom, you've got that. The only thing I was curious about on Blake 3, and maybe Tianon has other opinions or other people want to chat about this some. The only thing I wanted to double, triple check amongst ourselves is, are we comfortable with the link over to the specification? It's not a typical RFC, but I think when they were talking about this over in, maybe it was OpenSSL, that when they mentioned this repo, that they were like, that's as good as an RFC for us, or that was filling in the equivalent, because C2SP is the community cryptography specification project, and so they are kind of like a little quasi specifications group. So I think that's good, but I just wanted to double check amongst the team, make sure other people think that that's a decent reference if we wanted to start to standardize on Blake 3 using that. Ron, from your view, is everything look good and ready to merge?
Yeah, I think so, unless there are any other objections. Yeah, so this is that looks like a techno-political dance that's going on. We want this merged in OpenSSL, then OpenSSL says you don't need RFCs, this is okay, blah blah blah, and OpenSSL says first it needs to land as a provider function, and then we'll merge it in main based on what happens. So those kinds of dances that needs to happen. Meanwhile, we care because if it is in OpenSSL, then community is looking at it, and there is an active community maintaining it, hopefully. So that's why that is important for us. That's all I had to say about this.
For me, the fact there's implementations and there is a 1.0 specification sitting out there that people are saying, look, this is finalized, we're not going to change it later on. That feels like good enough to me to say we're going to register this algorithm. And whether people use it, we can't really deploy right now with distribution spec the way it is, but at least we're registering the algorithm. All right, so I think Tina and I will probably go through that one, give her a thumbs up in a little bit, hopefully, and get that pulled in over there. And maybe Sajay or some others want to look at that as well.
Is there anything else that will need to happen to support Blake 3
So this is
or checking?
just registering the algorithm. We're not really putting code in there that says anybody needs to do anything with it. In fact, even in the spec, it just says implementations may use this. All it's saying is if you see a digest algorithm out there that starts with Blake 3, this is what that means. It means that someone used the Blake 3 with the 256 bits digest algorithm. Whether someone supports that or not, we're not even touching that.
Yeah. But I guess maybe Rom, I don't know, you're working on supporting this in something, I'm assuming. Is there any other like rough edges you've hit?
So the only issue that I have hit is the implementation is Golang is single threaded. So the true power of Blake 3 is when it is fully multi-threaded.
Right.
Although in Golang they have a vector math, right? So basically they use the AVX2 extensions to parallelize computation. So that's how they're getting some benefit out of it. But we don't have a truly multi-threaded implementation in Golang yet.
Cool. Makes sense. But spec wise, once this is merged, you're off to the races.
Think so, unless the crypto community comes back and says, hey, this is broken. So
Cool.
I think from distribution spec, we still have the requirement that you can't push a manifest by tag and tell the registry what algorithm to use. And so the registry is just going to default to SHA-256 and says, this is the digest of that manifest you just gave me. That's still a rough edge that's going to need to be worked out at some point, but I'm looking at these as two separate problems.
Right. And I mean, at least if we can get Blake 3 in the blobs.
You can use it for the layers. You can even use it for potentially, there might be some issues out there we haven't run into yet, but you can do it for manifest error push by digest. You just can't do it for manifest error push by tag.
Is there any thought about adding, this may be much further down the road, but changing the upload blob APIs to support parallel uploads?
I think Ram has been pinging on that, whether you can do uploading of multiple chunks simultaneously out of order.
Oh yeah, it's one of my favorite peeves actually. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there was an issue in distribution spec for that. I think the pushback I've put on it is saying, let's see some implementations that want to do that. And the concern I have is that you've got multiple groups in there, both the registries and the clients, that can be on either side of that version of support.
Yeah.
You could have a new registry, an old client, new registry, vice versa. And you need to make sure you don't break in any of those scenarios. If someone trying to do an upload and they get something back and they think they're okay because the registry is just like, yeah, send your next blob, I'm good to go. And meanwhile, the client doesn't know that it just missed the last blob or the last chunk of the blob and is no longer pushing something that's valid.
Okay.
So something to do there, but I think that needs a little bit of work and people trying some implementations and seeing if they can do that in a way that doesn't break everything.
Yeah. Maybe some parameter when you initiate an upload session that asks for a capability and has to get back a capability confirmation.
Something so that they can sync up. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
All
cool.
right.
Now,
I'm going to keep powering through these because I see so many new faces in this. I'm guessing everybody's waiting for one of these bullets at the end here. I kind of want to push off reformatting distribution spec just in case that generates discussion because I suspect people might be here for the OCI scanner header. Is that correct?
Yeah, I created that issue. And the intent behind it is to make sure that the full history for our customers is as accurate as possible to their actual full intent, that is to for any execution environment. So we were wondering if it was easier for them to pass a header to make it clear that it's not really a pull that they're actually using the image for, but just for scanning vulnerabilities or anything else. Yeah, that was wondering if this is something we can add to the OCI spec.
I know Tina and I have comment on this one. I'll drop the link here in case anybody's not looking at the rest of the workflow.
Yeah, I did see that a lot of scanners do have SBOM and they might do head requests, but even for getting the SBOM, they would have to do a GET request and it would account to a pull, right?
That would be a GET request of the SBOM. And so now you're getting into how is the SBOM packaged and shipped, and is it, if it's being pushed by the scanner, then potentially it's going to be pushed with the refers API. And so you wouldn't have to pull the entire manifest. You would just do a head on your manifest and then the refers API to get the SBOM.
Mm-hmm. Would it be possible to still have this use case work if it was a comment when they pass a user agent? Because we would need, we were planning on providing a custom header for our customers on our own, but it would be an easier adoption if it is something that's documented in OCI and they're able to adopt more easily. Because we can look for these headers or user agents and make sure that they do not contribute to to the pull history. Do you have any other recommendations?
My initial thought on this one, just kind of hearing the thoughts you're going through, is that if you control both the thing that's doing the scanning that's generating these pulls and you control the registry that can look at those headers and has the life cycle requirements over there, I feel like you've already got everything you need without anything from OCI to have the data to know which requests need to count, which shouldn't count. I mean, potentially you're just looking at IP addresses and you know the scanner servers.
There could be more scanners as well that we are not aware of. Then we'll have to keep like a running list of scanners that we want to exclude. So we can still do that by looking at our logs, because we do have like some common scanners that the customers are pulling from, but there could be more scanners in future. We can have a list for those common ones, but it's not something that's always gonna be accurate. Because today we see in the user agent, we do see the scanner like Trivi or Sneak CLI coming through. We can still do that, but if there was a better way to not having a list of scanners we are actively avoiding.
You could also potentially do the inverse of that and say, let me look for user agents that I know are container runtimes. Looking at Containerd, Podman, Cryo, those kind of things.
Sure. What is the, is adding the new header, are you saying that it's not going to add a lot of value, or is it not going to like, not going to help our case a lot? Is that the concern, other than there are other optimizations that customers could have?
My initial concern is that whatever metrics you're trying to get might not be all that accurate, but if you know both sides of this stuff, you know exactly what you're filtering in or out. You can make your metrics more accurate than what they are now. You know, they wouldn't be any less accurate than what they are now because you're going to filter out exactly the things you want to do. But just trying to throw the header in there, I don't know that you can really say your metrics are any better just using that metric. I think there are a lot of things can put some values in there that might not really encapsulate all the usages of the image out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a concern, that even if they're passing a header, we're not sure if that's accurate, but it would be something that would help, because we're ultimately using the pull history at some point to help customers clean up images better. So if the pull history is skewed by the scanners, then it wouldn't make sense, because the cleanup would never work on those images. Yeah. Can discuss more about that with the team and can come back to it.
We did have a similar discussion where last access time becomes a problem when scanners come and touch the image. Is that kind of the scenario that you're thinking about? Basically, you can't determine whether these images should be there or shouldn't be there. The cleanup gets affected.
Yeah, if we were to support something where customers can clean up their images based on their pull history, if something is, then having these scanners to pull the images regularly wouldn't help their case.
Okay, so it's a very similar kind of a challenge. Basically, I think, Brandon, the issue is that it's very hard to determine when the image needs to go away. And user agents, but the argument against this is that we expect every scanner to implement that user agent, which is, or like the new header, which might take time.
Yeah.
So even if we standardize, you have a long tail of somebody not implementing it. So both sides are a problem. So I think it's a mix of both, right? That you probably need, even if you standardized on a header.
I would take it a step farther, saying even if someone implemented that header, it may not be a binary value for every client that's trying to use it. If you've got a mirroring tool that's trying to mirror this image to another location for some kind of pull-through cache or something like that, or any other reason, it may have multiple clients on the other side. It might not be just a single client, so it might not know why it's mirroring at any one given time.
I think you've also got an added incentive problem where clients don't have any reason to add this header. They don't get anything out of it or about being truthful in its value.
Yeah, and that's probably the divergence problem where some clients implement it, some clients don't, and others use a generic SDK where the user agent is not modified. There's like a compounding factor on these.
I think there are a fair number of scanners, maybe not now, but at least in the past, that just did a Docker pull on the image, exported that into the file system from there, and then did a scan of the file system so that the pull looks like it's doing a regular Docker pull to do a run later on.
Yeah, today in our logs, it does look like a regular pull.
From
the-
Docker or from Trivy? Or whatever tool.
Trivy, yeah, that they use Docker to pull.
Yeah, I think
The idea is not like getting all the scanners to immediately adopt it, and there's no clear incentive on it, but it would if it would be something that we could use additionally, like other than us updating our internal code to exclude some of the scanners that we know.
I think we could also potentially do both, right? Could take the common scanners we know about, put them on a list, and then
Yeah.
having this would allow a smaller scanner to take advantage of the header without having to.
Do you get the scanner headers, or does the scanner go through another like community or something where you don't get the header at all?
I think
Does it
they
go
would
through another
have to
what?
configure something on their end to be able to pass a custom header, as far as I know.
Right. And so do clients do that? Like they actually modify any of the configs to pass in even a scanner user agent? I just don't know. I'm asking. So
I know from my side, when I make my Reg client libraries, there's an option in there where clients that are using Reg client can override the user agent with whatever their user agent is, because it's a library to be used by other people. But that's not always set. People don't always use that, and they'll go with the default sometimes. And so if they're all saying Reg client on there, how do you know whether it's Reg client to do some kind of runtime thing, to populate a mirror, or to run a vulnerability scanner of some kind? There are a lot of potential different use cases all with the same header.
Yeah, I guess at this point we can exclude out some of the common scanners that we see in our logs, and if they do not pass a header, if it was a header and they did not pass it, we would not change our default behavior for pulls. It would just account to their pull history, and we would have to give that explanation why. But if they did have a header, smaller scanners could, we can talk to our customers and ask them to pass this header to help their case. So it's a possibility. It's not something that we would need our customers to do right away, but something that they can use in future.
Yeah, I share Sajay's view that I like the goal. I like what you're trying to do. My concern is that just you're not going to get the value you're trying to get out of it, is my fear. If I was to implement this myself, and I'll throw it out there to some of the other registry operators that probably have done this in the past, I might be inclined to set a threshold, to not say make sure that the pull count hasn't gone to zero, but just that the pull count dropped below a certain threshold, that I feel relatively comfortable that there are no serious use cases pulling this image at this point, because that's just the noise that we just see constant pulls of things all the time. So if you're only doing 10 pulls a month, well, that's probably a bunch of scanners that are out there, not actual end users. If you see 100 pulls a month, then there might be some actual users.
I'd say that's still a bit risky for some rare cases, but because it's about cleaning up like their images. It's not us not cleaning it up because we have a skewed pull history would be safer than assuming their use case and cleaning it up. So,
But I would put the onus on picking that threshold on the user if possible. I wouldn't be, as a registry operator, I wouldn't be saying this is the threshold everybody needs to abide by. I would say if you've got a repository on our server, you're allowed to pick this threshold if you want to, and then it's on you to make sure that that's the right number. And you would give them some kind of feedback in there. You would say, look, here's the report of all your images and where the numbers are.
yeah, this was helpful. We'll probably talk more internally and see how this could help and how we can work through this idea. Yeah.
So for Sajay, Michael, maybe Tianan, but I know Tianan disclaims all responsibility for registries that he might be familiar with. Even Ram, thoughts on your side for retention policies and life cycles and that kind of stuff? If you've done it differently over there.
Shama and I work together. Maybe who we should have introduced. So where our thinking is similar.
Ram, I see you coming off mute, but you're like back and forth with Michael on who wants to talk first.
Controversial topics. Yeah, Zot has retention policies and things like that, but we have no opinion this or that way. So
Sajay, is that all company secrets for you?
No, I just shared the fact that we have the same problem with the whole head of last access issue, right? So, I mean, I'm glad that somebody brought this up because we've been having the same challenge of kind of identifying who's doing what. The user agent is the RFC is kind of tight in the sense that it's just product version. I think Mozilla has a reference for extensions, but I don't think we can use that. So having a new header is probably the right way to go. I was just typing out a question to Michael, which is, and Shama, which is, do you think that we can actually persuade scanners to include this header? If so, I'm fully supportive. Otherwise, we'll have yet another header to worry about. And some folks will use it, some folks won't. I mean, that's the only concern I have.
I don't know. I mean, it seems like we have a lot of scanners who are setting custom header, at least setting custom user agents, and could probably set custom headers. I guess the other thing I was thinking of is, would it be worth suggesting that they include something in the user agent that gives an idea of intent? If you look at, web crawlers, there's kind of a lot of stuff that ends up being shoved into the user agent. And if they're already setting a custom one, it probably not be that hard to include some additional information.
If are there any other items to discuss? Because I had another question on the same thing.
The only other one I've got to discuss was going to turn into a crazy long discussion, so bring yours in.
How can we RC something like this, such a way that scanners can start implementing it, and then we can kind of like get it into the spec? Or do you just want to do a proposal? Because the problem is there's no, I mean, the argument will come like there's no correct implementation right now, nobody's using it, and so it'll never make it into the spec. Can we at least give an indication to folks that, hey, this is where we're planning, go ahead and start implementing it, and once we have maybe a couple of them done, we can then kind of give it a stamp of approval and push it into the spec. I'm trying to figure out the logistics, because I don't question the value.
Yeah, I guess that was our hope as well, to at least have it as something that customers can kind of start adopting and then make it part of the spec. Because we want to know how many scanners are willing to do that as well.
Perhaps draft PR or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm indicating that it's kind of an experimental, but we plan to kind of support it. And the plan would be to see at least a couple of scanners implement it, and then we can merge it into the next distribution spec.
I feel like there's a bunch of cases on either end of this that are very clear. You've got the runtimes out there. They're about to run a container image. You know they're pulling this image to run it and execute and do their thing. On the other side, you've got the vulnerability scanners and SBOM generators and some of those other tools. You know they're just pulling this down to just do their, inspection of the content, not actually do anything with it. But there's going to be a gray area in the middle, and I don't know how big it is, of tools out there that are doing stuff that could be either side of that equation, and the tool doing the pull doesn't know. I mean, to some degree, a Docker pull, you don't really know that someone's doing a Docker pull to run the image. Potentially, usually, but not always.
And that's even less of a truism with the Containerd content store underneath, where now there are many reasons you might pull data from a registry into the Docker data store to then pull it back out to scan the SBOM. So I'm coming from the perspective of being a Docker Moby engine maintainer and thinking about what value would Docker give this header in the Docker engine. And there is not an answer that is clear and makes sense and is always correct. There's not even an answer that I would feel confident saying is mostly correct. There's an answer that's probably correct, and that's the best I can do. And so I don't see a ton of value in the header itself from the client perspective, especially since it's just informational data for metrics on the registry side.
Yeah.
In other words, the registry could make the same guesses or inferences from my user agent that I could as the tool author. And they could make them with the context of the question they're trying to answer of, say you're trying to look for people who might be scanning. Now you can include these probablys and maybes, versus if you're trying to answer a question of who's definitely scanning, you can now exclude the probablys and the maybes. Where with this header, you won't have that granularity that's already present in user agent.
I'm coming from a similar with Reg Client, where you might be pulling down the image to copy it, inject it into a Docker engine that's in an air-gapped environment. You might be copying registry to registry, or you might just be inspecting to look at the manifest to see some details and look at the content remotely. And I would imagine Oras would have the same kind of challenge. Scopio would have a similar kind of challenge. Crane would have a similar challenge.
So, two parts to that. One is, I think it's kind of coming back to cleanup and cost of maintaining the content. If there's no deterministic way to say that, hey, this is just for scanning, and all the other pools are kind of attributed towards the fact that the image is actually being used, then there's no way to kind of clean up. I think that's kind of the one challenge. The second fact is, maybe you can think about it this way. There are extensibilities in the Docker engine to send client headers where client needs to configure stuff, right? And I think those configurations have been exposed in some way. So I'm guessing that it's scanners and whoever's going to use that still need to do the due diligence to plumb that value through. But it just gives away. And you're right, I don't see what's the value on the client side. It is clearly on the registry side, but it's also if you think of it from the customer side, they're just not going to have to pay for storage that they don't have to. So I think that's the way I was thinking about it. But yeah, specifically from a client or a Docker engine side, it does get really complicated to justify the usage.
I agree. I'm coming totally from the registry perspective and how we can support it. I guess this information can be, if provided, can be used differently by different registries. But in our use case, we were hoping that there was something that we can use for storage.
This makes me really want to update the tag API all the more now to pack all the extra data in so that end users can start making these decisions instead of pushing it off onto the registry. Things like pull counts and whatever else. All right. Was that the main item that all the new faces were shown up for? Are there other things in here other than the distribution spec reformatting that I'm getting ready to jump to? So I see Abhishek in here. I see Kyle in here. A bunch of folks that don't normally jump in. So I want to make sure we're covering any items you want to cover.
Yeah, hey, Brandon. I was here for the Blake 3, and Michael asked the questions that I wanted to ask. So thank you.
All right. Okay. So last one here on the agenda. Yeah, welcome, Kyle. Always happy to see a new face. Feel free to chime in if there's anything that we're not covering for you. Yeah, so on the reformatting of the distribution spec, there was a comment when OpenTofu was going through looking at some of their support, and I kind of questioned them of saying, hey, everything looked good in the spec. They're like, yeah, it wasn't quite that readable. And I can very much sympathize with people who are looking at distribution spec. If you pull the specification up itself, especially if you're looking at it in GitHub, the headers just blend in with the text. They shrink down the same level. It looks like a little bit of slightly bold text, maybe even slightly smaller at this point. So the thought is, does it make sense to do some kind of reworking, reformatting of the specification to make it a little bit more readable? And this can go a whole lot of different directions, whether we just do a simple changing of the header sizes and putting some little white space in there, to my thought is really go at it and not just limiting the headers, but to also reformat the text of the spec itself to really look at the two different use cases out there, which is that you've got people who are trying to implement it from the registry side and people who are trying to implement it from the client side. And whether we need to have some kind of Swagger or Open API or some other similar spec that documents here's each endpoint we have, here are the different parameters that it might take, the body of the message, the different return codes, all those kind of details. With the client side that might want some kind of workflow, but in that workflow, it would link over and say, here are all the endpoints you're calling, go look at the endpoint for seeing how you do that specifically. But I think there are some people who want to see some higher level visible thing they can follow through the logical process of saying, here's how I push an image, here's how I pull an image, here's how I inspect all the content. What do people think about just kind of a dramatic rewrite of that? Is that terrifying to folks, or do folks look at that spec and say, yeah, this could really use a little bit of a refresher? Stunned silence all around. I'm mostly looking at Tiana, Ram, and Michael on this one, because everybody else had to run away.
Is there I don't know. Didn't we have some issues reformatting a bunch of things in the past and sort of missing or losing some of the spec requirements? Like
Way back in the day, yeah.
I would.
So
That
I'll be
predates-
honest, and I'll tell you that my first thought when you suggested reformatting the distribution spec was the complaints that we deleted half the spec.
That's what I was thinking about.
Yeah, it was absolutely my very first thought was, okay, if we reformat it, does that mean we can bring back some of that missing content that adds important clarity about things like link headers?
Well, we delete half of it before. If we delete half of it again, we're now down to 25% of the spec. And so
This
Oh,
time we
yeah.
could add things.
consolidating.
Yeah, I guess you could take that approach instead.
Tiana and I could reformat the spec and just add all of the things we've been wanting to try to get in without having to discuss it. It's a good idea.
New feature, who this?
Yeah. I know John tried to bring back some of the old spec content, and the result was a bike shed pretending like it was brand new content when it wasn't brand new content. It was documenting existing state. And so he ran out of steam bike shedding what should have just been adding back old content.
Was that specifically the tag listing pagination?
Probably.
So we eventually got that in there. Took a while, but that eventually got back in there.
For what it's worth, I do hate the organization of the distribution spec as a consumer of it. It's like, I love that it's all on one page because I can control F and find the thing I'm looking for, but it usually takes like 20 instances of the thing I'm looking for to find the one I'm actually looking for. So that's both a blessing and a curse.
The only reason I know where half the stuff is in there is because I've worked on the PRs that got in there. Otherwise, it's painful.
Yeah, if you spend enough time with it, eventually you memorize where they all are, right? Like, my desk isn't a mess. I know where everything is. Well, my desk is still a mess, but I know where everything is, so it doesn't matter. In the case of a spec, that doesn't hold as much water because the whole point is that it's not for people who know where everything is. It's for people who don't. But take all this with a grain of salt. I'm not actually a maintainer of the distribution spec. I just happen to be a really heavy user and involved person for a long time and care a lot about this dang
You've
text
got a
file.
lot of good opinions too, so that's why I asked you.
Well, thank you.
Folks have opinions on whether it's like Open API, Swagger, or anything else, or just we kind of make something of our own, but it looks similar to that stuff.
My main interaction with Swagger has been the Docker Engine API docs. And I'll be honest, I don't love it, but that might be a quirk of how much I don't love the Docker Engine API. So it's probably no fault of Swagger, and I'm applying blame incorrectly.
Do I need to figure out how to censor these videos so that I can get back to your employer?
Yeah, no, I would comment as much in the runtime team's internal channel, and I'd probably get a whole bunch of the maintainers agreeing with me. But it's one of those things that's like really hard to change because, you know, we've got just a couple years of history here, you know, only like 12 now. That
Yep.
It's hard to move a ship that's been in production that long,
That it is.
which is a common theme for this group. That we've got a lot of things that they're not the ideal state, and it's hard to get to the ideal state because we're not in the ideal state. And because there's so much existing code that now hits those older APIs that we have to have a reason to change them, and it has to be worth changing because there's a huge amount of industry churn anytime we do any kind of change here.
My own experience with Swagger was that I was putting it in the code with all the right comment syntax in there so that it would be picked up by an automatic parser that automatically put into the documentation. We're not going to have that with distribution spec because we don't have an implementation we're pulling out of to generate the specifications. We're writing the spec directly. So I don't know if it makes the most sense using that exact format, but I do like at least the logical structure of it where it is an endpoint with the details you need to implement that endpoint. Whereas in our current specification, it's let me go look at how you do a manifest, you know, a content push. Let me go find the manifest push within there. And then it tells me, make your request look something like this with all these headers in there. And here's why you might need to have some of these headers. I like the idea of saying this header is mandatory, this header is optional. Here are the various values of it. Here are the various return codes, and lay it all out in a very structured format instead of a free text format that we've got right now. Not positive I'm the only one that wants that though. Go ahead, Tina.
I don't think you're the only one who wants that. I think you're going to get a lot of bike shedding on particular headers and particular error codes because, you know, that's what we do. One of the things that bothers me about the way the spec is laid out is that it's currently sorted across that high level axis of pushing content versus pulling content, where usually I know which endpoint I'm looking for, and push and pull is the secondary axis. Like I know that I have a manifest and I'm doing things with a manifest. And usually when I'm looking at the spec, I'm doing both pushing and pulling. It's never one or the other. It's almost always I'm copying content or I'm dealing with content from the registry and content I have locally and combining them to new content that I want to push to the registry. Things like that, where push and pull are both integral to the workflows. What I know right up front is I have a manifest. What actions can I perform on a manifest? Oh, here's how to get one. Here's how to put one. You'll notice those two requests are perfectly mirrored, just like you would expect them to be in a REST API, which isn't exactly obvious from the spec right now because those two requests are hundreds of lines apart from each other with a whole bunch of content in between.
So what do you think about taking all that kind of high level logical push and pull logic and moving that off into a more generic end user guide of here's the workflow you might take and just have that list a whole bunch of pointers over here's the endpoint in the spec you need to go look up this endpoint, look up this thing to implement this part of the logic, but to make the whole logical workflow something more graphical, more, you know, some kind of logical idea in there, but have it separated out from the rest of the endpoint documentation.
I really love the idea. The maintainer in the back of my head is yelling about bit rot. And who maintains this over time? Like cough specs.opencontainers.org that's currently broken and doesn't deploy properly, and nobody's working on fixing it because the owner of it isn't present.
So I would still have it in distribution spec. I just wouldn't have it in the spec.md. I would have it in,
Yeah.
high level MD or whatever.
Yeah, the effects of bit rot are less pronounced if it's not in the load bearing part. Yeah.
She did come back. Welcome back, Jory.
I think there is still a danger that users will read that document and assume that it is load bearing specification, and having that document accidentally use a word like should or must being interpreted as spec language when it's advisory language.
Potentially there might be some should or must over in that other side. I would have to dig through and look at it. Ideally, everything is over in the endpoint documentation, but the thought that you would push blobs before you push the manifest, that's kind of a higher level logic that's separated from the endpoint, but
Yeah.
there is stuff that end users should try to do when they implement it.
Yeah.
Yeah, part of that thought comes from the people that raised this were pointing over a lot of the ORS documentation. I just kind of chimed in and said, hey, is there anything we're missing over here? And like, well, we just really like the ORS documentation. We're used to working with it. We're familiar with it. But also when you go look at it, it's got a lot of that higher level graphical logic in there of saying, here's the content you're creating. Here's what it all looks like. And that works well for certain people that are trying to follow through with the spec, but not
Yeah,
necessarily everybody. I think there are two audiences there.
if you're not careful, you might end up using the word DAG, and then John will show up.
Can't show up now. We only got 5 minutes left. We have to do it at the beginning of the next meeting. Then
Yeah.
we do.
Yes, I do think, maybe I'm biased. I am a maintainer of the image spec. I do think some way for the distribution spec to make the relationship between distribution spec and image spec more clear would be valuable. And I think that's the kind of documentation that would be included in what you're proposing. It's like, here's how these things relate and how to use them in practice with the actual like image spec objects that you're trying to push to a registry or trying to get from a registry.
Yeah, we've got a handful of pointers in there, but they're all very abstract at this point. So something
Yeah.
there for users to look through and say, oh, that's how all these pieces tie together.
Yeah, and the lines between guide and spec here get very blurry as you get into the details of that. Like, this is helpful supplementary content that can help you understand the spec and how the spec applies to you, but this isn't the spec itself.
We do call it guidance over an image spec. I think
Yeah.
we can call it guidance over an distribution spec as well.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's at least an opinion. Other people, if you have different ones, feel free to chime in on the PR or the issue that I've got opened up over there if you disagree but don't want to disagree in front of TNON. Yeah, that was all I had for this meeting. Were there any other agenda items that I missed that got thrown in there? Otherwise, we'll go ahead and wrap this thing up. All right. Nobody else throwing stuff in here. If any of those TOB things, especially for like website, haven't merged already, feel free to go over there and give your thumbs up, because then I can just take the unanimous action of merging stuff with just a single review on the thing, because we have no limits over on that side. And otherwise, have a great rest of the week. You came back just in time for us to say goodbye, Jory.
I know. Well, I guess here's my last thing.
Oh.
I dropped in chat in the general. If anybody's interested in being part of that programming committee, I put the link to join the mailing list. And then also a link to like the event that we're doing the program for. So let me know. I hope you can all participate. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm on the mailing list. I got your test.
That's
All
very
right.
successful. Thank you guys. Bye.
Thanks all. Cheers.